Welcome to the Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community, a space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. You were just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Eric Robinson. Eric spent 12 years in Christian ministry, leaving the pulpit of his Baptist church to spend the next 24 years with the FBI, where he investigated drugs, gangs, crimes against children, and counterterrorism, among other violations. He has written a book detailing his experiences to be published in the fall. Well, hello. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm really excited for your conversation and, really thank you for saying yes to being on here. Like I was talking to you earlier, I really feel like these kind of conversations really need to happen, just like open and honest conversations to really start to heal. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this conversation goes. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's sunny, but cold.
But
I've got a fire in the fireplace, so it's a good day so far.
Okay, wonderful. That's good to hear. So just starting off, so you spent over a decade in Christian ministry before joining the FBI. So can you talk more about what was happening in your life that led to this transition to federal law enforcement?
Certainly. So my story is I grew up in a Christian home, great parents, loving, and we went to church every single week, and I enjoyed that. I grew in my faith through the years, and then in college started thinking, I've got Bible knowledge. I enjoy reaching out to people. I should get into ministry. And it didn't seem so much like a calling as the right thing to do. Like this just seemed right for me. So married my wife. We got into Christian ministry and went the usual route of youth pastor, associate pastor. And then together with a core group of Christians, we planted a church in Western New York. And I meant for that church, now I was going to be in charge. Now I was the senior pastor, and I wanted us to have a church that welcomed people that might not feel comfortable in church. And I didn't want to just pull Christians from that church over to give money to us. I wanted us to be successful in telling people about Jesus who otherwise would feel judged. And as we started the church, I gave that core group what I called a flinch test. And I said, look, how are you not flinching, not showing any signs of judgment on your face if someone comes to church dressed in a rock concert t-shirt, because that's not church clothes? Or what if they have alcohol in their breath? What if it's a homosexual couple? What if it's an interracial couple? Like these typical ideas where a lot of churches wouldn't accept them. And I told the folks, we want all of these people in church. I don't care if they're drunk. We want them in church, and we want them to feel like this is a safe place. So we were successful, and people were coming, and people were seeing their lives changed. And I felt like I was doing ministry the way it was supposed to go. But one of the issues of reaching out to people who haven't grown up in church is they had a lot of life problems. And with those life problems, I was unsuccessful in separating myself from those burdens. So when someone came to me and said, Pastor, I think my kid might be a drug addict, and here's the issues, I dealt with them, and then I held on to it. And better men have been able to manage that, but I couldn't. And so I went through 2 years where every single day without fail, every day, I had stress-related headaches. And so I told my wife, I have to find something less stressful. And so I joined the FBI.
Okay. Oh, wow. Less stressful.
And it was.
Okay.
It's just, it was a different stress.
Right.
It's threatening. Yeah, it's dangerous. And the adrenaline spikes because the body needs to perform. And then it goes down. And if the bad guy gets away, I don't care. It's not something that burdened me and kept me up at night. So the the day that I was accepted into the FBI, the headache stopped. And
Okay.
so that was my indicator that, yeah, that was probably a good choice.
Yeah, actually, I had a follow-up to that. So, when you first entered into law enforcement, what assumptions did you have about policing and justice, and how did those assumptions change over time? And I also like just a little word that stuck up too, how you were talking about the bad guy. Like, did you have that view of like good guys versus bad guys, and just start to see more of that complexities of like just, you know, entering into that space?
I, I did have some of that
Okay.
black and white, here's good guy,
Mm-hmm.
bad guy. And one of the advantages in doing long-term investigations with the FBI as opposed to just policing,
Mm-hmm.
where boom, here you are and here's a situation, is that I had the chance to go through much evidence, interviews, victim statements to where, yeah, it's pretty clear that this is a bad guy. And at the same time, there were different categories of bad guys too, because you could have a bad guy and or criminal. He's going to go to jail. He's getting charged. And then we do an interrogation afterwards or proffer sessions with attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And, Buddy and I would walk away and go, he's kind of a nice guy. I wouldn't mind other than him being someone who sells drugs. I didn't care if he lived next to me. This guy is a nice person. And then there's bad guys who are horrible human beings. And, you hate them just for who they are. Go to prison, sure, but also I don't like you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And so you've also mentioned working with teenage victims of prostitution. So what do you wish that the public better understood about the lives and circumstances of the young people that you encountered?
Well, the teen girls that we were trying to rescue from pimps would regularly come from broken homes. They were
Mm-hmm.
runaways. Their social workers would often tip us off and say, "Hey, this girl, is missing from the house, from the foster house, and
Mm-hmm.
she's prostituted before." And so we would go on that journey to try to find her. And they're so, at 15, 16 years old, they're so bereft of any positive adult influence in their lives, and often any positive influence at all. And so when we met them, they opposed us.
Okay.
I was kicked and slapped and yelled at and spit on because I was taking them away from their soulmate, this man who truly loved them, who was an older, in his 20s pimp who had manipulated this girl so well that this is the only person who's ever shown what appears to be actual affection. And so here's girls who have never had someone stick up for them. And so it's so easy for that pimp to turn on charm and they go, great, finally someone. And then it would take some repeated influence, some repeated interaction where now they might see us as the good guys because the police were always trying to catch them, trying to keep them from making a living. And that was us.
Mm-hmm.
But now over time, they'd see the guardian ad litems. Here's an attorney sticking up for them in court. They'd see different social workers. They'd meet our victim coordinator. And now it would sink in almost like a stray dog that's afraid and you're trying to love it.
Mm-hmm.
It took time and then they would begin to trust us along the way.
Right. No, no, thank you for sharing that. So, in investigations involving vulnerable people, how do you balance that role between law enforcement and also having empathy for those who are just caught in difficult circumstances?
Well, working with the victims, I had one victim who was an elderly handicapped woman
Mm-hmm.
who had given money to my subject because she believed that he was her boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, he was gay, so that was not true, but he led her to believe that and was taking money from her. And I remember I was working with the IRS as well, approaching her and trying to lay this information on her, ask her for evidence, ask her if we could look through her phone. And
Mm-hmm.
she was agreeable, but also oppositional. And it took some interaction before I realized I am walking into her life and she had never had someone who loved her. Like she never had a boyfriend. I was walking in and destroying her dreams and telling
Mhm.
her that this person is false. And it wasn't until I could recognize that I was better able to interact with her and win her over too. So, here I went in as an investigator doing investigative work. You're a
Mhm.
victim. Of course, you want to give me all the stuff that you need to bring a conviction on this guy, but that wasn't the case for her. I needed to first place myself in her position and realize, oh my goodness, I am crushing her dreams
Right.
and taking away her true love.
Right. Right. No, 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 I understand. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that you said that you also like wrote about your experiences through a book. So I was wondering if you'd just like to talk more about your book and, what's the process of like putting that together, or, what even gave you the idea to like put those experiences into writing?
The process of putting that together
Uh-huh.
was my wife saying, you should write a book as
Okay.
I was nearing retirement.
Uh-huh.
And I said, yeah, but I never wrote down the stories and I felt like I missed the opportunity. She said, well, try anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So she gave me a book from one of her clients. She promotes authors, and the book was about how to write books. And it said two classes of people. Some people just sit down, seat of their pants, and write. Other people start to frame out the story and then they add to it. And I thought, yeah, I'm probably going to be the seat of the pants guy. So let me start to frame out my book.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down at the computer and I was going to work on what that would look like. And I thought to myself, oh, let me just write the introduction.
Okay.
And from there, I just started writing.
Wow.
And and the way that agents interact, if we ever have downtime, if we are waiting for a drug dealer to show up, or we finished an operation and there's some freedom, we're always telling
Mm-hmm.
stories. And it I never lost that amazement that I was in the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
that this is this is pretty neat. And the stories that we would tell were were remarkable. Like the kind of things that, you know, we just say as common, like, yeah, remember that time that guy jumped out of a second story window and broke his back? You're like, yeah. And then he ran,
Mm-hmm.
his brother ran to here. These stories are very interesting. And I thought, I think people would enjoy hearing these.
Yeah.
And I wrote the book with a thread of what it's like. What would it be like if a Baptist pastor joined the FBI? Wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
that be crazy? Oh my goodness. And
Yeah.
so it was that my time in ministry, that's who I was still. But how did how did that play out as I was breaking down doors as a SWAT operator, encountering barricaded subjects, working long-term financial investigations with a subject who is telling everybody that I was sleeping with his first wife and then his second wife
Mm-hmm.
and his girlfriend. Like, these are crazy things, and wow, I got to do them.
No, thank you for sharing that. And, I just want to say thank you again, for being a part of this. Cause like I was telling you earlier, like I feel like there's a lot of like us versus them mentality. And that's why I feel like we have to have these like hard conversations with each other too. And that's why, really love to see where this will go. So you've also spoken about how the phrase police just need to come home safe at the end of the day can unintentionally reinforce an us versus them mentality. So can you talk more about what you mean by that? Because yeah, also like how I was saying too, like I have this strong distrust also for law enforcement, not only because of like the communities that I've seen with policing, but like also my personal experiences. So yeah, I'd love to just hear from your perspective of like this like us versus them mentality that I feel like we need to talk about.
Well, I had a black man once ask me, he said, "What would you
Hmm.
say to someone like me or my son
Right,
who had a mistrust of law enforcement?" And I
right.
said, "I would not deign to think that I had something to give to
Hmm.
them. If you have an experience with law enforcement that has shaded your beliefs,
Hmm.
who am I to tell you otherwise?
Right.
Maybe I can help with your interactions, but people have a mistrust, and it's unfortunate. I found that treating people with humanity and kindness was never something that I regretted. So I
Hmm.
can always be bad cop. That's easy. That can flip on a switch. And I've been in fights, and there were times that I needed to physically take control of people and situations.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I come to your house to arrest you at 6 in the morning, and I've got 20 friends with rifles in an armored vehicle, and we break your door and we pull you out of your bed in your underwear, I show you a piece of paper from a judge that says you're going to prison. I'm in charge. I don't need to yell at you. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need to slam the table. I've already shown you. There's no question I'm in charge. And
Yeah.
so rarely, and I feel good about saying this, would I see agents then further, push the issue and show that they are the alpha in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you've been humiliated. I know this is the hardest thing that you're facing in your life right now. This is the worst day of your life, and I am the one who brought it to you. And so if I treat you like a person who's going through a very difficult time,
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to lead you through that. And I found that, and I understand this is somewhat manipulative, but these are bad people, that treating people with humanity then and saying, let me help you through this. These criminals would often tell me things that they probably shouldn't be telling me, confessing to their crimes. But also, it did, I feel, play into what was necessary,
Mm-hmm.
that they needed help. And I feel bad not offering some type of help, understanding, walking them through what the next steps are going to look like because they may not know. This may be their first time. And I try to tell them, look, this is the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from here is going to be just a little bit better. You'll see an attorney, you'll understand, you'll work it out, you'll adjust.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. But I wanted to ask you too, do you recognize though that there are systemic issues that are going on though? Just, I'm thinking particularly like racism or racial profiling that I think it really goes beyond the individual, individual person of color feeling distrustful versus like there's a reason because like I feel like there are like more aggression like towards people of color. So yeah, I just want to see your perspective if like you do recognize that there are like those systemic issues that are going on beyond the, like personal interactions that you might be having.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it more. It was less evident in the federal system
Okay.
because that has so many more checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
It's the federal system involves investigations, which still can have systemic racism, but it it's not a policing. A policing is, hey, you stop, let me, check, let me pat you down. And I remember having conversations with fellow agents and task force officers
Mm-hmm.
and trying to discuss, like, do you not recognize that this is out there? This is
Mm-hmm.
systemic. We've had years of following in this, and so like the Overton window is moved. If
Mm-hmm.
you say, well, that's not that bad, well, it shouldn't be here in the first place.
Yeah.
It's too far to this degree, and now we accept this. Let's not push it there. Let's start to
Mm-hmm.
move it back to what should be normalized. So I do see it, and I
Yeah.
recognize that I have a privilege. I was not, I'm not only
Okay.
a white cis man, but I also am fairly wealthy. I'm
Mm-hmm.
well off. I've done well, and I was in a position of power.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And, I think it's just that, like, I also had personal experiences. So I've been with someone who was, or is Mexican American, and just like he'd be pulled over so many times just for like a broken headlight. But like, I think not just that, but it was just like when he'd be pulled over, like the police officer would call like three to four other backup like police code. But it just like I feel that's what I mean about like the aggression and just like the stereotyping because when I'm with like white friends like they don't have that same but like I'm just wondering it's just like you know like because when I hear on the news too just a lot of that like stereotyping that's when people police or like law enforcement even use like deadly force I think based on a person's like skin color or something like is that something that you've also recognized though.
Well, i- yes. I mean, there can be something hidden in each person
Hmm.
where I am presuming an aggression from you based on your skin color or your
Yeah.
lack of clear English spoken to me. and that gets promoted by certain officials.
Mhm.
That rhetoric, whether you think it affects you or not, it's like sediment that builds up a little bit and a little bit, and it will have
Mhm.
an effect upon people. My my own feeling had been I would rather risk injury to myself
Okay.
before engaging in deadly force with somebody who does not deserve it. And so, I- and that's a difficult balance because if it's just one on one, that's one thing. But I also have partners around me that I need to protect. And if
Mhm.
I'm too slow to engage when I should, that endangers them. And
Yeah.
so the idea that we talked about of just police saying at the end of the day, you just need to go home safe, it engenders this idea that
Right.
the entire society, the community that we police, is one that's out to kill us. And if I start my shift
Right.
thinking it's a war zone, then that's
And
dangerous of how I approach you.
those are messages that you're actually given though, like in law enforcement, like it's just your job to come home safe, or do you feel like it just that's kind of just unspoken,
No,
thing that people
it
understand?
is. It is.
Okay.
I feel like in the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
it has been like the people that I worked with were very cognizant of respecting people's rights,
Okay.
respecting the Constitution, and treating people professionally.
Mm-hmm.
I had the father of one subject thank me for executing a search warrant at his house and arresting his son
Mm-hmm.
because he was afraid his son would be a mass shooter and he couldn't control him.
Okay.
And I've had people respond with thanks for how we treated them, even though we had just come to their house to arrest their nephew or something. So
Mm-hmm.
there is, by and large, a professionalism in the FBI,
Okay.
and then we hold to that high standard. But at the same time, there
Right.
is the hey, we're here to come home safe.
Okay.
And my feeling is I will come home safe because I have trained well with these men and we will
Right.
do our jobs the right way, not
Yeah.
because we are opposing these people.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. And, I know you talked about this a little bit before, but I'd love to like hear your further thoughts. So, from your perspective, what part of policing culture makes it hard for officers and communities to trust one another?
Well, look, I know this for certain. And
Mm,
as an FBI agent, my time was mainly spent in the office. I was not
okay.
on the street,
Hmm.
just being called to a domestic violence scene where I had no idea what's happening. And so my life was different than a police officer's.
Okay.
And despite that, I learned early that I needed to be taking care of cynicism, bias, and racism that might creep up in my life.
Hmm.
So my first 5 years working drug cartels in Chicago was solely uh, encountering Mexican
Hmm.
Americans who were somehow tied to narcotics trafficking.
Hmm.
And I remember very clearly thinking, man, I need to be careful because this is making me angry towards Mexicans because
Right.
everyone I saw was selling drugs, helping people store drugs, running money for that. Like, and
Hmm.
that was something I need to engage with. And that was with much less contact with
Hmm.
the darker parts of society than police have. So they're if police officers are going to be responsible,
Hmm.
that's something that they need to uh, confront as well. That look,
Yeah.
not just for their own mental health, but for the bias and the harm that they might bring,
Hmm.
they need to engage with reality of how is this affecting my view of other people and especially specific groups of people.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Thank you so for being so transparent about your perspective and your reflections too. And I think that's where the issue is like law enforcement having these blanket assumptions for like certain like communities too. Because I've been in communities where it seems like there's a lot more like policing, or I'll see a lot more police cars versus like other communities. So yeah.
Well, what would happen and maybe
Hmm.
you've done better work on yourself, but what would
Hmm.
happen to you
Yeah.
if every day
Mm-hmm.
this type of person
Right.
is someone you encountered and was carrying out crime. That's hard not to then say, yep,
Yeah.
they're all like that. And
Yeah.
it takes work to do that.
Yeah, and what helped you to like challenge those assumptions though? Because I think it's just like what helps me, like, I've done like as I've shared with you a lot of social justice work and working with like different communities, different marginalized communities. So I think that's what helped me, like as we were talking earlier, just like seeing people for their humanity. But I feel like, when you're I could see like, being like safety, wanting to keep yourself safe as well. But like I think there's those moments to like walking into situations having those like assumptions and biases, and that's why I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because I feel like you're not the only person, and I feel like that is where those like issues do come. And I feel like with the people that I've worked with too, like law enforcement, we are distrustful because like we just see that. I think those are just what we've seen too, like law enforcement being really causing harm to our communities for I don't know. So that's why like I'd love to have like your perspective, because I feel like I have a lot of perspectives from the community side. That's why I'm hoping that people can be inspired by this conversation and just like be like, we just need to have these kind of conversations with each other.
Well, and it strikes me as you say this
Hmm.
that my question is in a
Yeah.
sense played out, that
Uh-huh.
you have a feeling towards law enforcement
Right.
because your
Hmm.
much of your interactions with law enforcement and those of your friends have been negative, and so now
Right.
you have
Right.
to wrestle with painting them in a certain picture.
Hmm.
Now the difference there is
Yeah.
we're in power. So we
Right.
have the authority as opposed to you just being you. So,
Hmm.
it's different when it's the government having that
Hmm.
that trend, but it still is something where I tried to approach people with curiosity because,
Hmm.
as I said, like I had a gun, I had guys with me. If I needed to flip a switch, I can, but
Hmm.
otherwise, I want to be open, and I want
Right.
to know where you're coming from
Hmm.
before I anoint you with my opinions of who you
Yeah.
are and what your attitudes, and I think that that is something that we can all do. It's something
Hmm.
the police can certainly do, of coming into a situation with an openness of,
Yeah.
let me understand what this is, and not say, I've seen this 1,000 times. I know what
Right.
this is. We're done.
Right. No, thank you for saying that. And so, just during your time doing this work, did you see moments where patience, compassion, or listening de escalated situations that you think might have otherwise turned into confrontations?
Yes, I can think of one, and
Okay.
without going into all the details,
Uh-huh.
we had a number of pastors in the Toledo, Ohio area,
Mm-hmm.
one of whom had taken a foster child and was pimping her to other pastors.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of those folks got life in prison for that, deservedly. But I was asked to lead the arrest team and the search of one of the pastors' homes,
Mm-hmm.
a black man. And I assume that one of the reasons I was asked to do the interview was because I was a pastor, and we could do Jesus talk together.
Mm-hmm.
And as we knocked on the front door to announce our presence, his two 20-ish year
Mm-hmm.
old nephews answered, and they answered with belligerence. And that was one where we could have just taken them to the ground,
Uh-huh.
could have just shoved them down, whatever it might have been, could have arrested them, even, who knows. But I put my hand on one of his shoulders and I said, I understand the situation. I understand that this is embarrassing. We have a warrant. Can you step aside? Let me talk to you while my colleagues go ahead and enter the house. And I mean, it went from these two
Mm-hmm.
kids yelling at us and
Okay.
another officer yelling right back to, yeah, I mean, if we
Yeah.
want to, we can get physical, but just bringing them to the reality of, look, this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about this. And they calmed down.
Right. No, no, no. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And, I know that we were talking about like, I think mistrust happening from both the law enforcement side as well as like communities. But what do you think like that we need to start doing to actually start healing or like start rebuilding that trust with each other?
Well, some of the most success that I saw and was fulfilling is when doing some of that work with the teen prostitutes where it was many facets,
Okay.
where it was the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
where it was our local Toledo police officers assisting. And
Yeah.
then we had the guardian ad litems who would step in with the court, and we'd have the social workers, and
Mm-hmm.
we'd work with the foster parents as well. And all of us finding our role to rehabilitate this one young person's life.
Uh-huh.
And that was satisfying to see because I can work a case and it's just me and the prosecutor, and then our my buddies go and we go arrest somebody, and there we have it. But
Mm-hmm.
as each person had a different part, it felt very almost creative, like we were making something new, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone here was adding their own parts to this recipe of this young girl's life. And I don't know how that works in other people's lives and other aspects,
Uh-huh.
but having law enforcement play their role, where, as you suggest, recognizing
Mm-hmm.
harms that can be done. Well, then the community also recognizes, yes, this is the one group that can bring legal justice also. And then other facets, each playing their part,
Mm-hmm.
knowing their roles, and then also knowing their limitations so that they don't step beyond that too.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And just going back to what you were talking about earlier, I love how you bring like compassion and empathy into this work. And so what do you think that like what kind of trainings, mentorship, or leadership do you think that can help cultivate that kind of approach in like law enforcement and just help like others also have that same approach that you brought in?
I don't know about trainings. I
Okay.
have found that trainings just like if I don't care,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter what you say. If you want to come and talk to me about sexual harassment and I think
Uh-huh.
that's a crock, then it does no good. Um, what I found is
Mm-hmm.
that, as you mentioned, leadership, it it needs to be leadership among your peers.
Okay.
So when I found myself in Chicago confronting, man,
Mm-hmm.
I'm having this bias against Mexicans. I had a friend who was very like-minded and he was a Christian, and we talked about it. He was on the same squad as me and he was out doing the same things as me. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we talked about together. And so I feel that in the past that was my position, and it needs to be other peers who step up in that singular leadership role to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let's consider this. This is how we need to act and respond. I had a situation once where we executed an arrest warrant on an individual,
Okay.
and with an arrest, we are allowed to clear a house to see if he might be hiding, which means looking in places that a man might hide.
Mm-hmm.
And but then we're also looking to get consent to search too.
Okay.
But as we're going through, I saw colleagues opening desk drawers. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, well, he's not in a desk drawer. And if you
Okay.
find a gun or drugs, that's illegitimate for any type of affidavit. So I turned to a buddy of mine on the team after that
Mhm.
and I said, hey, man, if you ever see me stepping outside of what's appropriate, I'm asking if you would put your hand on my shoulder and talk to me. And I
Okay.
was then waiting for him to say, yeah, do the same to me. And he did. But that's needed.
Right.
The people who see something wrong and rather than shouting about it, start individually going to each other and say, let's do no harm.
Right.
Let's use our positions only to do the things like bringing justice,
Mhm.
bringing some type of healing to the community through these arrests. Let's not abuse it on top of that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And, I really appreciate our conversation, but just thinking like we're just two people talking with each other. And I think it's just cool to like, see our different perspectives and like really having this honest dialogue with each other. But, in your perspective, what kind of conversations do you think police and or law enforcement and communities need to have with each other? I mean, I feel like even just in our short time together, like, it could be one example. But when you think of like the broader, because I feel like I don't know if you feel that way, but but I feel there's still like just a lot of hurt, a lot of healing that needs to happen. So how do you think we need to start talking with each other?
Well, I feel like it comes down to a contact principle.
Okay.
So if my only contact with Mexicans, as I was saying in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, is like it's when I'm arresting them or I'm on surveillance watching them do dope deals,
Uh-huh.
then that doesn't help. And then I recall going to jujitsu when I was in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the guys I rolled with regularly was named Jorge, and he was a plumber,
Mm-hmm.
and he was telling me about how he was here legally. Well, I knew Jorge. He was a great guy. I loved him. He was a sweet
Mm-hmm.
fella. But
Yeah.
now I'm so, oh, yeah, that's what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Being in contact with somebody that I like, who can show me that it's, that's not the only thing out there.
Yeah.
This is a real person. And in those calm moments, not the town halls where angry people come and yell at angry people
Yeah.
yelling back, but in these instances, because police are in power, the
Mm-hmm.
onus is upon them to be the ones reaching out to say, I want to touch people who are going to maybe change my opinion and
Okay.
soothe that bias that I might be developing. And do I know somebody who could introduce me to those folks as well, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be? And it's at the same time helpful for the community to talk to police officers and say, hey, what's it like for you? What are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that you see that are hard to deal with? I remember whenever I would go into the prisons and I would
Mm-hmm.
interact with the prison guards, and if they were surly with me, I gave them a pass every time because their work job is going
Mm-hmm.
into prison. And I thought, that's terrible. They've got a lot to deal with. And so maybe some of that compassion seeps over to police officers.
Yeah.
And hopefully, again, because we are the ones in authority, the police take it upon themselves to learn about the lives of those that they are set to protect,
Mm-hmm.
not to protect themselves from.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. And so, if someone has been personally harmed by policing or lost trust in the system, what would you want them to know from your perspective inside of it?
That it's unfortunate,
Okay.
that it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Part of what I worked was civil rights violations,
Okay.
which was investigating officers for having done harm.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember folks asking, like, are you a little ashamed that you're going after officers? And I thought, no, I don't want these people in our system. These
Yeah.
aren't brothers. These guys who beat people when they shouldn't. They're not brothers. They've given up that right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody has mistrust, there's again, they
Yeah.
probably have a valid reason for it.
Right.
And I would hope they could find something that would bring them comfort, not to convince them to trust the police, but to find someone who can still be a spokesperson for them
Mm-hmm.
or justice,
Mm-hmm.
someone who could make them feel safer despite the abuse they've gone through.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. And just on the flip side of that, what do you think people in law enforcement could learn from the lived experiences of the communities that they serve?
You could actually, like, taking aside all that you're talking about with
Mm-hmm.
social justice, you could be
Yeah.
a better police officer.
Okay.
So I always try to think to how do we appeal to what people will respond to? And knowing my community will and their experiences is going to help me do my job better. So yes,
Right.
definitely I can treat people better. I can see them as humans. I can have compassion. But if you want to appeal to a police officer to say, boy, the more that you're among people, now you're going
Mm-hmm.
to hear from them. Yeah, it frustrates me that that corner has always got drug dealers on it. And so I'm hearing from you of or people are talking about some of the difficulties their kids are going through. And so now hey, that
Right.
maybe those are some kids I need to check up on because they could be susceptible to gangs,
Mm-hmm.
susceptible to being a mass shooter. Like if you're open to that,
Yeah.
now you're a better cop. Now you're a better investigator
Mm-hmm.
by knowing what people are experiencing.
Do you find that that's common that like law enforcement does like approach in that way, or I think is it very common with that, or do you feel like people do people always approach it with that kind of intentionality going into communities?
No, I'm special. There's there's
Yeah.
look there's people who go into law enforcement for different reasons,
Okay.
and it's very clear that some of them go into there because I want to show you
Yeah.
how much of a badass I am, and
Hmm.
I love authority, and if I can carry a gun for a living, that'd be the greatest.
Yeah.
Um, I I'm retired now. I still have plenty of guns. I'm a
Yeah.
great shot. I'm glad I don't carry my gun every day because it hurt my hip.
Okay.
So, and then there's others who get in for a good reason because they want to do right. And I think that's
Right.
most. Now, over the years, that might change because of what they've experienced and they've gotten away from their first love.
Hmm.
And maybe we can bring them back and maybe we can influence them to say, hey, remember when you joined? Why did you do it? Well, yeah, I did it because I wanted to make my community a better place. You're like, yeah,
Yeah.
how can we get back there?
No, I love that. That's what I was asking you, like, because I don't have very much interactions with law enforcement, and I love your approach, just how we were talking. But it's just I've seen these like ICE recruitment commercials that I find is not helpful for either side. But it's putting that mentality of come join ICE and go get the bad guys. I feel like it like puts that mentality of like, oh, I'm gonna go get the quote unquote bad guys, and just I don't know. I just feel like even when it comes to recruitment, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like we have to encourage people to see people more in humanity versus like the good guys, bad guys kind of mentality.
Yeah, and we use, even though it sounds like you're an 8-year-old, we use the term
Uh,
bad guys all the time.
okay.
You're like, what kind of bad guy are you going after? And that was just a
Okay.
term, but it, yeah, I was fortunate, and I will just
Hmm.
affirm this again. From my experience, the men and women in the FBI are good people who are trying to do the right thing, and that is bring justice to what's in front of them. Here's a case. Can
Hmm.
I can I prove this in a court of law? And I've had cases that I've kicked because we can't show anything or this guy doesn't look guilty.
Hmm.
And I have done this, and I've witnessed many other agents do the same. That when we would prepare informants for
Hmm.
meeting with a subject, a bad guy, I would tell them, and I've watched many others say, look, do not direct them. We
Hmm.
want to know if this is a person who's wanting to do harm or
Right.
looking to carry out some type of violence. We don't want to entrap them. We only want the bad ones.
Okay.
And also, we don't want to embarrass ourselves by,
Mhm.
getting shown up in court. But mainly, there's enough bad guys out there. Let's get the bad guys and, not force ourselves into situations where we can make proof of something, but it's not a worthy target.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. So, just in your perspective, what does a healthier relationship between communities and law enforcement actually look like to you? So, not just in theory, but in practice.
Well, they have those donuts with cops times where
Okay.
communities try to have people get
Uh-huh.
together, and I don't know how good those are. I was not a police officer on the street. My brother-in-law was. He spent his year as a cop and then retired from that. And he carried a reputation of someone who was going to give you a ticket if you deserved it, but
Hmm.
not if you didn't. And he was someone that the other officers looked to for advice and for a calming demeanor. And
Hmm.
I respect him for that. He didn't try to rack up the most tickets on the force and get praise from the captain or something. He did what was right. And I feel like part of that is just knowing the people around, and the responsibility again for that is on the
Hmm.
police to be the ones reaching out.
Okay.
We're the ones in power,
Hmm.
so we need to be the ones who condescend and reach out.
Okay. No, I really love that. And, thank you so much for your time today. You really helped to open my eyes, like, and I think start to open my heart up a little more too. And just as we're wrapping up though, so now that you're retired and writing about these experiences, what conversations do you hope that your book will spark?
Uh, I think that my book will spark conversations that
Uh-huh.
go, holy smokes, are you serious? Um, Again, I've never lost a fascination. And now looking back, I
Uh-huh.
feel like it's almost like I was in the FBI for 24 years as a Baptist pastor, like, almost as a bet. Like somebody says, "Oh, I
Mhm.
bet you can't do that." And I'm like, "Oh, here I go." And then I spent 24 years in it. The interactions I had with people, the cases, they're the
Mhm.
kind where, you see a news show on and you go, "Wow." But that was, after all those years, that was a pretty regular instance that we had where we were arresting actual international terrorists. I
Mhm.
had I had a convicted terrorist once say to me that I had a magnificent beard, and like,
Okay.
darn it, if
Okay.
that's not the greatest compliment you could ever get, that's
Right.
amazing. Like this guy wanted to slaughter Americans, but he had
Yeah.
respect for my beard, and we stopped mass shooters, multiple mass shooters.
Okay.
And I broke down doors as a breacher for the SWAT team. And so I think some of the stories that I get to tell and the way that I tell it,
Mhm.
um, will draw people in to say that seems pretty crazy. And then even since I wrote the book, I've
Yeah.
I've written down another couple dozen, like, oh, I remember that one. That one's kind of crazy too.
Yeah. Okay, no. Well, thank you again. But just lastly, how can people find you if they like to connect with you? And also, how could they get your book if they want to get it?
So my wife,
Okay.
Weaving Influence Press, WI Press, is going
Uh-huh.
to publish the book in the fall. That's my wife's company. Unfortunately, paying customers have jumped ahead of me in line, so that's why it's not out yet. But
Mhm.
it'll come out in the fall, and then I'll be promoting it. I'll be re-amplifying this wonderful conversation too. But otherwise, people can follow me on Instagram at _Eric_Robinson.
Okay.
I was amazed that wasn't taken. And if they look me up on LinkedIn, they can look up my name and they'll see this face right here and
Okay.
they got the right guy.
Okay, wonderful. But thank you again for being in conversation with me. Truly, I appreciate it. And yeah, I hope that this conversation, once people listen to it, can help to spark more conversations too. Because, like I was talking to you before, I think we really just need to start talking with each other and, see if there's places where we can find that common ground. But yeah, I wish you nothing but the best. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Nace. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye. Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad and sad and bad, I say to myself, relax, lean back, it's a brand new day. And every time I feel so down that a frown is all that's on my face, I remind myself to take a breath, it's a brand new